Welcome to the Crazy Might Work podcast, where we celebrate authors, entrepreneurs, innovators, inventors, and scientists who live at the very frontiers of human consciousness and possibility. We discuss their moments of breakthrough and analyze the strategies they use to enhance their own thinking and challenge conventional wisdom. So good morning, everyone. My guest this morning combines her background in biomimicry and communications to serve as a connective tissue between humans and the natural world. She leads the communication strategy at the Institute of Biomimicry. She has a Master of Science in Biomimicry from Arizona State, as well as a bachelor's degree in journalism from Georgia State University. She works with media organizations, brands, and influencers to enhance advocacy and engagement for nature-inspired design. Please join me in welcoming the Communications Director at the Biomimicry Institute, Lex Amore. Welcome, Lex. I love the the humility implicit in the term biomimicry. The idea that we're like a young child, in an evolutionary sense, and kind of learning and modeling on what nature's already been doing. So I like that, quieting the human mind to take that in. I spoke recently to one of the top neuroscientists in the world. It's a guy called George Paxinos, and he was saying he thinks the greatest danger to humanity in the world today is human exceptionalism. Mm-hmm. So the idea that we're somehow superior and removed, from nature is the biggest existential threat, according to George. So really interesting, that this is a way of rethinking that and going, we're actually part of this and can learn from the rest of the system. So I really like that.
Incredibly wise.
Lex, I wanted to come back to something that you've sort of alluded to a couple of times in passing, which is this concept of kind of design principles that are evident in nature. So if we sort of abstracted and then abstracted again and said, what is in common, when you look at the way that nature's designing, are there some threads and some things that nature, irrespective of the solution, is doing consistently across all of them? You mentioned one, I think, in the context of decomposition, but are there others? Are there other things that that we see as kind of recurring themes in that sort of design principles of nature?
Yes, absolutely. There's actually, so Biomimicry 3.8, which is our sister organization, they came up with, and this is run by Dana Baumeister, a set of, actually they called life's principles. So there are 6 main principles and then 20 sub-principles. We also use nature's unifying patterns. And so basically those are more truncated, easier to understand. So like nature uses sunlight and water. But really, to get a little bit deeper with these life's principles, nature adapts to changing conditions. Nature uses life-friendly chemistry. Nature uses water as a solvent. Nature integrates feedback loops, evolves to survive. There's these deeper things that we can start to look at of what nature's doing really well and why we should emulate them. And so I really like the Life's Principles tools because it's part of why we've always hesitated from getting into a certification for biomimicry, like to call something biomimetic, and because that's not really how nature works. And in fact, there's the chemistry that we have available today. That's some of the plastics, like that's just not something that to have a fully biomimetic product would basically be to be nature. And so part of it we look at is on a spectrum. So how well, again, is life creating, or is this design creating conditions conducive to life? And so these principles help guide you to that. So you can look at it of how well am I building with modular and nested components? How well am I using form for size and being able to use that kind of efficiency? How well am I being able to have all of these components degrade into things that aren't harmful for the environment? And we live in an imperfect world. And that's kind of the point. One of the best things about biomimicry is we're not trying to go back to before the Industrial Revolution. It's just not possible. What we can do is look at what's the problem we have right now. What's the context right here? And where are these spheres of influence that we can actually make decisions and make some changes happen? So we're actually looking right here. And it takes a lot of different levels, because then you start to realize, again, this is a system that you're a part of. And so where you could be working on, let's say, noise reduction for a wind turbine, or to make it more efficient, that is part of a bigger problem where you're looking at renewable energy as something that is generating the power. And so you can use biomimicry at all these different scales to get better, more efficient, saving money, saving time, being able to use these kinds of practices available to then again come back to, is this fitting into the environment? Is this ideally regenerating the environment? Nature cycles nutrients. There's no concept of waste in nature. So if we're not doing that, what can we do to be better like nature? And those are some of the principles that can help get you there.
Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. Now I'm going to go back to some of those cool examples, and I've got to ask you if there's one thing that really stands out for you as a surprising application of nature's wisdom in a human context, something that has maybe stood out for you. What's your favorite example?
Oh, that's such a hard question, Paul. I have so many. That's actually one of the most encouraging things about this, is there's so many cool application ideas out there. There's so many people doing like really fascinating things. And at the same time, there's also, we work with youth as well. And so from the ideas that they come up with our youth design challenge, like we're actually teaching middle and high school students how to think like this, and the ideas that they create that could be application, like that blows my mind. But one of my favorite ones right now is actually working still in the fashion industry. So they're called Amphibio, and it's an up and coming startup. So they're not in commercialization yet, but they're working on it. It just really blows my mind, this whole concept. So they've created this recyclable PFC, which is a chemical compound free polymer that it has the potential to totally revolutionize the outdoor fashion industry. So current waterproof textiles they're impossible to recycle, and they're made with a lot of harmful chemicals. And so this innovation is inspired by the feathers of birds and lotus leaves for the hydrophobicity that they have. So basically it's like this texture that doesn't let water droplets stay on the actual product itself. And so that's where they're emulating this structure and this form to create a very dynamic yarn made from nanofibers. That's wrapped into microfibers and then into a macro surface. And this is all one material. So one material gets weaved into this yarn. And then they actually got inspiration from the tiger beetle and some butterfly species that when they combine colors at the micro level, to the human eye, it looks like another color. And so this is kind of a unique way to get around using multiple colors in a single solution, which can obviously why there's the chemistry that goes into these garments. And so if they want a garment to be green, for example, they actually can put together blue and yellow that appears green, so they don't have to have all the colors of the wheel. And they're partnering with big brands like Patagonia, I think, is one of their biggest hopes here. And I think they're going to land that hopefully in the years to come. Another one of my favorites also comes from the fashion industry, because we all know spider silk has had that thing where it's super strong. But they actually cracked the code to mimic this, the way that the spider spinnerets, their ability to spin this fiber at room temperature without harsh chemicals. And it comes from a liquid gel. So the process, which is why, again, the outcome of like what they're really doing is it's 1,000 times more energy efficient than synthetic petroleum fibers. And what's really cool is water is their only product. And so this is huge for a very harmful industry as it stands. Both of those teams have actually gone through our Ray of Hope Prize program, where we help startups bring this kind of things to market. I know I mentioned Sudoc before, and one of the other examples, because I want to come back to your podcast is called Crazy Might Work. And so we've actually been told the Design for Decomposition initiative that we've been working on with the fashion industry and trying to make it function like an ecosystem, have been told that it was utopian, but not without merit. And so part of it is like we took that and we're like, yes, bring it on, because it really, those are the bold statements that we're trying to say. Like, yes, we want to be better and we can be better. It just takes a lot of, as William McDonough has said, don't just be less bad, let's be more good. And so this kind of thinking really helps us step beyond the comfort levels and design things that are going to be really inspiring to people. Of course, I have countless other examples that I could talk through.
Well, I think I've got a new catchphrase for Crazy Might Work: utopian, but not without merit. I really like that. Next, a couple of the examples that we were talking about earlier are, I guess, more product in nature, in the sense that, here's something amazing that nature already does, and there's a way of working that into human reality in the form of a new product or service or offering within an industry. But I just wonder if you have any examples for us of how nature has been used to inform social systems, or the way that human beings interact or organize themselves. So more at that social level, because again, I think, the human arrogance is that we're smarter. And so, when it comes to the more complex stuff, that's the human domain. And I would think social interaction is probably in that category. So I would just love to hear if you've seen examples of nature informing society or social interaction.
Yes, absolutely. This is actually something that there's a lot of case studies in the works that are coming to fruition. I'm not quite ready to talk deeply, but I have a couple that are, they're really inspiring and I think that are relevant. But in general, there's this bigger idea here where we are learning about how nature can better collaborate together in teams, and also having these kinds of the processes in place. And again, coming back to efficiency, resources, and time. IBM, they have a smarter city initiative, and they teamed up with Smart Design to create these innovative new approaches to organizing and self-regulating communal water use among city residents. So this is that kind of social system level approach. Another, swarm intelligence is a big one worth noting, where the concept of a few simple rules inspired by social insects has been used to make processes such as freight transfer at Southwest and IT support at Capital One more effective. And so these are things that are that human level, and it's a little bit more abstract. So when you're looking at these kinds of analogies, it's not as on the molecular level where you're not mimicking necessarily that form and that function on that place, but it is the interactions and the processes and the systems at play of like how do organisms, interspecies and outside of their species, how do they communicate? How do they collaborate? And what can we learn from that and improve what we're doing? And I think there's an element there too of the storytelling that happens of how do you explain these kinds of things to your team? How do you inspire them? What are the values that you have inherently in your company and the way that you're functioning as a team together?
Lex, when you look forward and you think about, what's the potential of biomimicry and, where is it going? I'm sure there's been an evolution in the time that you've been involved in it where, it's certainly become more known. But what do you think is the kind of ultimate aspiration, and how mainstream can biomimicry be?
There's, to quote Janine again, because I really appreciate the way that she said this, in 25 years, what we'd hope is actually that biomimicry isn't a term that we used. It's just called good design. That's what we hope for. the changes I've seen, it's gone from, there's more examples, there's more application, there's people interchange sometimes the idea of bio-inspired, nature-inspired. They're not always using the term biomimicry, but there's a lot more science that's coming out that's saying these solutions exist. And that kind of on the academic level, we're seeing a lot more research labs being able to look at this. And so what we want is also to train biologists so that they can work with designers. Like in an ideal world, if you're designing a building, having a biologist at the design table, having everyone at the beginning at the design table to talk about these unintended consequences that may come as a result of this ultimate design is powerful. And so in an ideal world, after learning about how interconnected we are and how nature has these amazing solutions, the goal is for everyone to kind of slow down and start to think about what is the full scope here. There's life cycle assessments out there. There's all these, tools available for use, but really we're coming back to intention. What is it? What do we want our design to do? And what are these things that could come as a result of that? And how can we learn to fit into our natural environment, the one that we live in, counteracting that idea where humans think that they're superior and that they can do anything? We do have limits and boundaries that we need to respect and observe. And there's a way to shift this whole thinking from scarcity into abundance if we just know how to tweak the way that we're interacting with the world around us. I would love to give the gift that I got to the masses, that moment where it went from despair to hope. That would be my dream for this.
Yeah, I hear in that there's an aspiration to move from the kind of win-lose binary thinking where we win and nature loses to something that's much more symbiotic, and I guess in keeping with the kind of original intention of the system. But I'd like to just wind it back a little, and we'll come back to Biomimicry Institute and perhaps just informing our listeners about how they can learn a bit more about biomimicry, maybe connect with you and the institute. But before we do that, I'd like to just go back to again a more sort of personal level and just think about perhaps for you, Lex, what it's meant for you at a personal level in terms of what can biomimicry do for you, kind of emotionally, or in terms of empowerment as a person. I hear for you that you've drawn inspiration from it and hope from it. But what do you see happening in others? What happens when individuals get exposed to biomimicry and they start to practice it or use it in their work?
I think a sense of agency, being able to be faced with any kind of problem and just ask, what would nature do? There's a lot of science too, and so I lead this by saying there's actually 3 elements of biomimicry that are really important here. So we've talked a lot about the emulate, where you're literally translating that biology into design. We've touched on the ethos component, which is this idea we have a moral responsibility as humans to care for this world that we live in. How are we treating each other? How are we treating the natural world? What is our design, our system, our process, whatever we're working on? How is that supportive or regenerative? And then there's this third aspect of reconnect. And that's where we come back to the science of rewilding and forest bathing and being able to actually reconnect with the natural world by merely going out and sitting in a natural place. And part of biomimicry is about observing and being able to really look at what's happening here. What are the interconnected parts? How are the birds interacting with each other? What is their relationship to the insects that are around them? What can you see when you sit outside and just observe? And part of that then comes, there's a practice we use of nature journaling where you're starting to sketch things out. And so there's this artistic component that comes in that has natural healing benefits. So you don't have to be a designer. You don't have to be an inventor or a maker to practice biomimicry in your life. It's really just about coming home to this natural world, this idea that you're an imperfect animal living in this crazy, weird earth place that is dynamically changing all the time. And every moment seems like if one perspective you could have that you're carrying everything from the past or you're looking ahead to the future. And part of that idea of stepping into the natural world is that you actually come back to this present moment. And that can instill so much relief. And as someone myself, I'd suffered from chronic pain for many years. I've overcome a back injury. I've had many health challenges, and having that home in nature and just being able to look outside, even if I couldn't walk outside, was such a relief for me. And I know that there's aspects of this that would really help people start to heal themselves so that they can then have an influence on healing the rest of the ecosystem that surrounds them. But in the design world, it's very tangible, applicable practice that you can take to whatever you're making and make it better, make it more efficient, make it save money and time and all the things that a CEO wants to hear, but also be really good for the planet and be good for your human body, your kids and your family, and also the community that is your family.
I can't remember who said this, Lex, but I remember a quotation which went along the lines of, if you want to really see something, try and draw it. And I think that that ability to just kind of sit and be in nature and really observe is kind of a lost art, and so it sounds like at least part of that is a return to that kind of immersive presence in nature and really taking it in.
Yeah, there was, during the pandemic, it was when we finally shut everything down over here, started realizing, like, what do we do now? Like, not just functionally for our programs, everything had to shift to an online format, but we also recognize that people can't go outside. So we wanted to figure out how can we bring nature to them. And so we came up with 30 Days of Reconnection, which basically is like an intro guide to anyone that just wants to start bringing this kind of thing in their life. And if they can safely go outside, then there's resources for that. But if they can't, the next best thing, which is finding some natural organisms around your apartment and your home, but also nature videos. And so teaching that kind of the nature journaling, and you start by really, even as observing your dog's paws, like these little things that are available to us right here, and start to practice this. I like to call it, it's a perspective shift. It's a different lens to see the world. So you're not just applying this in the practice, it's a lifestyle. It's the same way that you would look at health. It's coming back to that idea that this is how you can view life. This is how you can interact with life. And that's probably what the master's program did for me, is that it just radically transformed. After 2 years of being trained to see in a certain way, all I see is how nature functions around me. And I'm not a designer. I'm not a maker. And yet I said that I am a designer. I'm not designing products, but I am designing my life.
Lex, if people want to know more about biomimicry or connect with you or the Institute, what's the best way for them to do that? And are there any kind of pathways for someone for whom it is a new concept and they'd like to try it out or start putting it to work somewhere in their lives?
Yes. So there's so many resources available. So to start, going to biomimicry.org, there's a lot of, there's obviously what we do there between the youth education. So if you are a parent, if you're a teacher, we have a full curriculum for you to actually teach kids how to make these things, and also help to teach you how to teach this to them. And then there's, of course, the Ray of Hope Prize that we've talked about with the startup support. And there's also things like a global network that we have where there's people around the world that can come together and learn from each other, teach each other. And with that, we also put together a community guide. So how do you bring biomimicry into your community? And it's a very simplified approach. There's a free resource for anyone that wanted to just actually go through the design process. It's called the Biomimicry Toolbox. And you can also find that from our site. And that is the best, just free thing to go and learn. And then you can use asknature.org, which is also free to use, that has countless biomimicry examples that are actually in the world. But then, as we were talking about biological strategies, how does nature communicate? How does nature do these kinds of things? And then you can just literally type in the search bar and get a lot of examples. But let's say that you actually are wanting to take this up a level. There's some offerings there too. So there's the more affordable online course offering if you're trying to get the fundamentals of being a practitioner. It's called Learn Biomimicry. You can also find this from our site. They're one of our partners. And that is more of like the $200 to $300 range of if you just want the full fundamental, like this is how I practice this thing from leaders in the world teaching us, all the way up to the masters. If you want to go into having a master's of science in biomimicry to learn how to apply this, like the people that I studied with, everything from architects to engineers to biologists to me as a communicator. And so there's cross disciplines that you can apply this kind of work. And so while there's a lot of different avenues to learn from, I invite everyone just to start with the basics. And so the toolbox and Ask Nature is a great place to go and explore those. We also have some really fun videos on YouTube that are animated. They're very short, 2 to 3 minutes. And then you can actually see what is the problem being solved? How did this team look to nature? And what is the solution they created? And that gives you a really good understanding, like what exactly we're talking about, because we've said a lot during this conversation, and until you really see it, kind of like what you were saying with the nature journaling, when you can really understand something that you draw it out, it's the same when you're watching things. That's how a lot of people are consuming things these days. And we're, of course, on social. Instagram would probably be the most fun place to go and find things, examples and different things that we just love about nature. And then if you're just more in the professional community, we do publish more studies and some of the examples out there in the world. What is happening with the whole global network on LinkedIn? That's a really great place to find us.
Thanks so much, Lex. It's been a joy. It's always good to talk with someone that really loves what they do and is purposeful and passionate about the things that they are putting out in the world every day. So really enjoyed the conversation with you. It's ranged far and wide, but I think you've given us a great takeaway on biomimicry, and hopefully inspired a few to give it a try and dig into it a little deeper. So really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you, Paul. It's been such a pleasure. I love talking about this, more so because it gives me the hope, and it helps others recognize that you're enough where you're at. We have some serious problems in front of us, but nature probably has the solution.